Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Storm. Terrence had built his life like a fortress, methodical, calculated, impenetrable. At 35, he owned a chain of high-end security consulting firms that protected the wealthy elite of San Francisco. His reputation for discretion and ruthless efficiency had made him indispensable to people who valued their secrets above their lives. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who protected others' secrets would soon discover the devastating ones hidden in his own home. Terrence's marriage to Danielle Golden had been a strategic alliance that blossomed into genuine love, or so he believed. She came from old money, the kind that whispered rather than shouted, and her father, Randall Golden, owned half the shipping lanes on the West Coast. Their daughter, Emma, now 8 years old, was the light of Terrence's world, a precocious child with her mother's beauty and his analytical mind. The family cruise had been Randall's idea, a celebration of Golden Shipping's 50th anniversary. The luxurious 200-foot yacht carried only family and close associates, floating through the pristine waters off the California coast. Terrence had noticed the subtle changes in Danielle's behavior over the past months. The distant looks, the carefully guarded phone, the sudden interest in yoga classes that seemed to run longer each week. But tonight, as he watched her from the upper deck, everything clicked into place with the precision of a sniper's scope. Danielle stood at the stern, silhouetted against the moonlight, embracing a man Terrence recognized immediately. Zachary Winters, Randall's head of operations, and the golden boy of Golden Shipping. The embrace wasn't familial. The kiss that followed wasn't friendly. And the words Terrence overheard through the night breeze cut deeper than any blade. "After this weekend, we'll be free," Zachary whispered. "Your father's plan will work perfectly." "Emma's such a burden anyway," Danielle replied, her voice carrying a coldness Terrence had never heard before. "She looks too much like him. It'll be easier this way." Terrence's blood turned to ice. Whatever plan they were discussing involved his daughter, and from the tone, it wasn't meant to end well for either of them. He retreated to his cabin, his mind racing through possibilities. In his line of work, he'd learned to think 10 steps ahead of his enemies. He'd just never imagined his enemies would be sleeping in his bed. That night, Terrence lay awake listening to Danielle's breathing beside him, every rise and fall a betrayal. He thought about Emma sleeping in the adjoining cabin, innocent and trusting, unaware that the people she loved most were plotting against her. The protective instinct that had made him successful in his business now focused on his daughter with laser intensity. By dawn, Terrence had made his decision. He would not wait for their plan to unfold. He would force their hand, make them reveal themselves, and then he would destroy them all. Chapter 2. Blood in the Water. The second day of the cruise dawned with deceptive calm. Terrence moved through the morning routines with practiced normalcy. Breakfast with Emma, casual conversation with the other guests, polite interactions with Randall and his crew. But beneath the surface, he was a predator circling his prey. Terrence's security background had taught him that the best intelligence came from letting people think they were unobserved. He'd spent the morning discreetly planting micro-recording devices throughout the yacht, gifts from his own company's surveillance division. Every conversation would now be captured, every whispered plan documented. The devices paid off faster than he'd anticipated. At lunch, while Emma played with her cousins, Terrence listened through his encrypted earpiece as Randall met with Zachary in the ship's office. What he heard shattered any remaining illusions about the Golden family's true nature. "The insurance alone will set us up for life," Randall's gravelly voice crackled through the feed. "Tragic accident. Father and daughter lost at sea. Danielle inherits everything as the grieving widow. Then we restructure the company with Zachary as the new CEO." "What about the investigation?" Zachary asked. "Terrence has too many enemies in his line of work. Could be any number of people who wanted him dead. The authorities will chase ghosts while we count money. And Emma, collateral damage. She's Terrence's daughter, not mine. Never like how he tried to turn her against traditional family values anyway, filling her head with ideas about being independent. Terrence's hands clenched into fists. The casual way they discussed murdering his daughter, their own flesh and blood, revealed a level of evil he'd only encountered in his darkest professional cases. But it was Danielle's voice that truly broke something inside him. "I never wanted children anyway," she said, her tone as flat as if discussing the weather. "Zachary and I talked about this. We want to travel, live freely. Emma's just an inconvenience we inherited from my mistake with Terrence." "Your father's right about one thing," Zachary added. "She's got too much of him in her. Too smart, too observant. She'd figure things out eventually." The recording captured the sound of glasses clinking, a toast to their daughter's murder. Terrence removed his earpiece and looked across the deck at Emma, who was laughing as she played tag with her cousins. The innocence in her eyes, the complete trust she had in the adults around her, strengthened his resolve. These people had mistaken his love for weakness, his civility for vulnerability. They were about to learn the difference between a protective father and a predator unleashed. That afternoon, Terrence began implementing his own plan. He sent encrypted messages to his most trusted associates, men who understood that loyalty was rewarded and betrayal was punished without mercy. By evening, pieces would be in motion that would ensure his family's enemies faced consequences they couldn't imagine. But first, he needed them to make their move. He needed them to reveal themselves completely, to commit fully to their betrayal, so that when justice came, it would be absolute and undeniable. As the sun began to set on the second day, Terrence watched his wife prepare for what she thought would be his final evening alive. She had no idea she was actually preparing for her own downfall. Chapter 3: The Abyss Gazes Back. The third evening arrived with gathering storm clouds that seemed to mirror the darkness building in Terrence's heart. He had spent the day playing the role of the oblivious husband and father, while his hidden recordings captured every detail of the conspiracy against him and Emma. The most damning revelation had come during Danielle's afternoon conversation with her sister Caroline, who was also aboard the yacht with her husband Brooks. "Are you really going through with this?" Caroline had asked, her voice trembling. "It's the only way," Danielle replied coldly. "Terrence will never agree to a divorce, and his prenup protects all his assets. This way, I inherit everything, and Zachary gets control of Dad's company. It's perfect, but Emma's just a child. She's his child, not mine. I've pretended to love her for 8 years, Caroline. 8 years of playing mother to a girl who looks at me like she can see right through me. She's too much like him, calculating, always watching. She'd expose us eventually." What Terrence found most chilling wasn't just the planned murder, but the complete absence of maternal instinct. Danielle spoke about Emma, like she was discussing the disposal of unwanted furniture. The recording also revealed that this wasn't a sudden decision. They'd been planning this for over a year, carefully choosing the perfect moment when they'd all be isolated at sea, far from immediate help. As evening fell, Terrence's associates had confirmed receipt of his instructions. Miles away, other wheels were already turning. But tonight, on this yacht, surrounded by his enemies, Terrence would play his most dangerous game yet. The family gathered for what Randall announced would be a special evening celebration. The champagne flowed freely, and Emma delighted in being allowed to stay up late with the adults. Terrence watched his daughter with fierce protectiveness, memorizing every laugh, every gesture, knowing that after tonight, everything would change forever. Around 10 o'clock, as the yacht sailed through increasingly choppy waters, Randall stood and raised his glass. To family, he declared, his eyes meeting Terrence's with what looked like triumph. To bonds that can never be broken. The toast was their signal. Terrence could see it in their eyes. Danielle's forced smile, Zachary's nervous energy, Randall's predatory satisfaction. They thought they were looking at a dead man. "Actually," Terrence said, standing slowly, "I have something to say first." He pulled out a small device, a signal transmitter that would broadcast to his security team. But more importantly, it would also transmit the recordings he'd gathered to a secure server, ensuring evidence of their conspiracy would survive whatever happened next. "I know," he said simply. The words hung in the air like a sword. Danielle's face went pale. Zachary took a step backward, and Randall's expression shifted from triumph to calculation. "Know what?" Randall asked, but his hand was already moving toward the inside of his jacket. "I know about the insurance policies. I know about the planned accident. I know you've been planning to murder me and my daughter." Emma looked up from her game, confusion clouding her young face. "Daddy? What's happening?" Before anyone could respond, Randall's mask finally slipped completely. His face contorted with rage as he lunged forward, grabbing Emma roughly by the arm. "You think you're so smart?" he snarled. "You think your little security business makes you untouchable? A child from you doesn't belong in this family." With shocking brutality, he lifted the screaming 8-year-old and hurled her over the yacht's railing into the dark, churning waters below. The splash seemed to echo in slow motion as Terrence's world exploded into action. Without hesitation, he vaulted over the railing after his daughter, hitting the cold Pacific with the determination of a man who would either save his child or die trying. Behind him on the yacht, he could hear Danielle's voice, cold and final. "Dad is right. She's worthless." Those words, spoken about their own daughter as she struggled in the deadly waters, sealed every fate that would follow. In that moment, as Terrence fought the waves to reach Emma, something fundamental died inside him. Something that had once believed in mercy, in forgiveness, in second chances. They had no idea what he would do next, but they would learn, and the lesson would be written in blood and betrayal, reaching far beyond this yacht, touching lives they'd never considered, and awakening a darkness in Terrence that would remake their entire world. As he pulled Emma's shivering form against him in the black water, Terrence made a silent promise. They had shown him their true nature. Now he would show them his. Chapter 4. Resurrection and Reckoning. Terrence and Emma spent 14 hours in the Pacific, clinging to a life preserver that Terrence had managed to grab during his desperate dive. The yacht had disappeared into the night, leaving them to die as planned. But what the Golden family didn't know was that Terrence's security training included survival tactics that went far beyond their imagination. As dawn broke, a Coast Guard helicopter appeared on the horizon. Terrence's emergency beacon, a device he always carried, known only to his most trusted associate Marcel Glover, had been transmitting their location all night. The rescue was swift and professional, but more importantly, it was documented. "Thank God you're alive," the Coast Guard captain said as they were pulled aboard. "When we got the report that you'd both been lost overboard, we feared the worst." "Report?" Terrence asked, though he already knew the answer. "Your family filed it this morning. Said you'd both fallen overboard during the storm, and they couldn't find you in the dark." Emma, wrapped in emergency blankets and still shaking from trauma and hypothermia, looked up at her father with eyes that had aged years in a single night. "Daddy, why did Grandpa do that? Why did Mommy say I was worthless?" Terrence held his daughter close, feeling the fire of vengeance burning away any remaining doubt. "Because they're not our family anymore, sweetheart. But don't worry, Daddy's going to fix this." The Coast Guard delivered them to San Francisco General Hospital, where Terrence's associates were already waiting. Marcel Glover, a mountain of a man who'd served with Terrence in military intelligence before joining his security firm, approached with the grim efficiency of a battlefield medic. "Boss, we've got problems and solutions," Marcel said quietly as Emma was taken for medical evaluation. "The problems: they filed life insurance claims this morning. Started moving assets before your bodies were even supposed to be found. Zachary's already been named interim CEO of Golden Shipping. And the solutions?" Marcel's smile was razor sharp. "The recordings you transmitted were received and backed up. We've got everything. But more importantly, Randall Golden has no idea who he just made an enemy of." While Emma slept under medical supervision, Terrence learned the full scope of his family's betrayal. Not only had they planned his murder, but they'd been systematically looting his companies for months, transferring assets to offshore accounts controlled by shell companies linked to Zachary. But their biggest mistake had been underestimating who Terrence really was. "Marcel, it's time they learned what we do to people who hurt children," Terrence said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a death sentence. "Which protocol, boss?" "All of them. That afternoon, while Danielle played the grieving widow for the media and Randall celebrated with champagne in his penthouse office, Terrence began implementing a plan that would make their nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. His first call was to Jeremiah Alexander, a former CIA operative who now handled Terrence's most sensitive overseas operations. The second was to Dwight Moreno, whose specialty was making people disappear without a trace. The third was to Hannah Schaefer, a former federal prosecutor who discovered that justice sometimes required operating outside the law. Each of them owed Terrence their lives, and each of them understood that some sins demanded punishment beyond what any court could deliver. "They think they killed us," Terrence told his assembled team that evening in a secure facility outside the city. Emma was safely hidden in a private medical facility under assumed names, guarded by operators who would die before letting harm come to her. "They think they're celebrating their victory. They think they're safe. They think wrong." The room filled with the kind of silence that preceded violence. These weren't ordinary security consultants. They were Terrence's inner circle, men and women who'd followed him from the darkest corners of military intelligence into the private sector. They were professionals who understood that some enemies couldn't be reasoned with, negotiated with, or reformed. They could only be destroyed. "I want them to understand what they've done," Terrence continued. "I want them to experience every moment of fear my daughter felt when she hit that water. I want them to feel helpless, betrayed, and abandoned. And when they're broken completely, when they beg for mercy they'll never receive, I want them to know it was because they tried to murder a child." Marcel cracked his knuckles. "Where do we start, boss?" Terrence pulled up a holographic display showing the Golden family's entire network. Shipping routes, financial holdings, family members, associates, weaknesses. It was a web of connections they'd built over decades, and Terrence was about to turn each strand into a noose. "We start by making them vulnerable," he said. "Then we make them suffer. Then we make them disappear." Chapter 5. The Hunter Becomes the Hunted. 3 days after their deaths, Terrence's revenge machine began operating with the precision of a Swiss watch. The first phase was psychological warfare designed to make his enemies paranoid and sloppy. Zachary Winters was the first to crack. On Monday morning, he arrived at Golden Shipping's headquarters to find his office stripped bare. Security claimed they had video footage of Zachary himself authorizing the removal of all furniture and personal items, though Zachary had no memory of such authorization. His access cards had been deactivated, his parking space reassigned, and his company credit cards declined. When he demanded answers from Randall, he found the old man in a similar state of confusion. Strange packages had been delivered to Randall's home. Packages containing surveillance photos of his most private moments, recordings of conversations he thought were secret, and detailed financial records of accounts he'd thought were hidden. "Someone's playing games with us," Zachary said, pacing Randall's office like a caged animal. "This has to be connected to Terrence somehow." "Terrence is dead," Randall growled, but his voice lacked conviction. "We watched him go over the side. Then who the hell is doing this?" Neither man noticed the micro-drone hovering outside the 60th-floor window, recording their every word for Terrence's analysis. Meanwhile, Danielle was experiencing her own psychological torment. She'd awakened that morning to find all of Terrence's belongings exactly as he'd left them. Clothes laid out for a day he'd never see, coffee mug still containing his last cup, his computer displaying family photos she thought she'd deleted. When she demanded to know who'd been in her house, the security company claimed she'd authorized the restoration herself. But the most unsettling development was Emma's room. Danielle had planned to pack away her daughter's belongings immediately, wanting to erase all traces of the child she'd helped murder. Instead, she found a room exactly as Emma had left it, down to homework assignments spread on the desk and a half-finished drawing of their family. The drawing showed Terrence and Emma holding hands on a beach, smiling in the sun. Danielle wasn't in the picture at all. That night, Danielle called Zachary in a panic. "Something's wrong. I keep hearing Emma's voice in the house. I swear I saw her reflection in the bathroom mirror, but when I turned around, nothing was there." "You're imagining things," Zachary replied, but his own voice was shaky. Guilt can make you see things that aren't there. I don't feel guilty, Danielle snapped. I feel like I'm being watched. She was right. From a van parked 3 blocks away, Jeremiah Alexander monitored every room in her house through cameras so small they were invisible to the naked eye. Every movement, every conversation, every moment of growing paranoia was being recorded and analyzed. She's breaking faster than expected, Jeremiah reported to Terrence. Another few days of this, and she'll be ready for phase 2. Terrence watched the surveillance feeds with cold satisfaction. Emma was healing in the secure facility, working with trauma specialists who were helping her process what had happened. She was stronger than her mother in every way that mattered, and she was alive. That was all that mattered to him now. What about Randall? Terrence asked. He's the toughest nut, but we're making progress. Hannah's people have been visiting his business partners, asking questions about Golden Shipping's insurance policies and recent changes in leadership. Half his board is already talking about calling an emergency meeting. And Zachary? Marcel's grin was predatory. Zachary's about to have a very bad day. Turns out his mother, Vicky Winters, has some interesting secrets. Secrets that could destroy more than just his career if they came to light. Terrence felt a moment of satisfaction. In his previous life, he believed in justice through legal channels, in building cases and following procedures. But his enemies had taught him that some crimes required more direct justice. They'd murdered his child, or tried to. They'd shown him that mercy was weakness, that forgiveness was foolishness. Now he would show them what real power looked like when it was wielded without restraint. Phase 2 begins tomorrow, Terrence announced. It's time to start taking things away from them. Everything they value, everything they think makes them safe. By the time we're done, they'll beg for the mercy they never showed Emma. And if they try to run? Marcel asked. Terrence's smile was arctic. Where can they go that we can't follow? We're not bound by jurisdictions or legal procedures anymore. We're not playing by their rules. What rules are we playing by? Simple, Terrence replied, watching Danielle pace her living room like a caged animal. They chose to become monsters. Now they get to learn what real monsters look like. Chapter 6. The Walls Close In. The second phase of Terrence's campaign began with surgical precision. While his enemies struggled with psychological pressure, he began systematically dismantling their lives piece by piece. Zachary discovered the extent of his vulnerability when he arrived home to find his mother, Vicky, sitting in his living room, tears streaming down her face, clutching a manila envelope. "What happened?" he asked, but the look in her eyes already told him everything he needed to know. "They know," she whispered. "About Nevada. About what happened 20 years ago." Zachary's blood turned to ice. The Nevada incident was supposed to be buried forever. A hit-and-run accident that had killed a family of 4 while Vicky was driving drunk. Zachary had been 17, and his mother had used the Golden family's influence to cover it up, framing a homeless man who died in police custody before he could defend himself. "How is that possible?" Zachary demanded, snatching the envelope. Inside were police photos from the original accident scene, evidence that had supposedly been destroyed decades ago, and detailed financial records showing how the cover-up had been orchestrated. "There's more," Vicky said, her voice breaking. "They have everything. Video footage from the gas station where I stopped after the accident, showing me washing blood off the car. Banking records of the payments we made to the police chief. Even audio recordings of phone calls we made that night. The envelope also contained a single photograph. Emma's school picture with a note written in a child's handwriting. Some secrets don't stay buried forever." Zachary felt the world tilting around him. Whoever was doing this wasn't just targeting him. They were targeting everyone he cared about, forcing him to choose between protecting himself and protecting his mother. Meanwhile, Randall Golden was discovering that his empire was built on far shakier ground than he'd imagined. His shipping contracts were being mysteriously canceled, with clients claiming they'd received evidence of safety violations and environmental crimes. His bank accounts were frozen, pending investigations into money laundering allegations. His insurance policies were being reviewed for fraud. But the most devastating blow came when his daughter Caroline called in a panic. "Dad, they took Brooks," she sobbed into the phone. Men in suits showed up at his office with federal badges. They said he's being charged with human trafficking. That's impossible, Randall snarled. Brooks doesn't have anything to do with that side of the business. The silence on the line was deafening. Caroline's voice, when it came, was small and terrified. What side of the business, Dad? Randall realized his mistake too late. His son-in-law, Brooks, had never known about the Golden family's darker enterprises, the cargo containers that carried more than legitimate goods, the shipping routes that moved people who didn't want to be found. It was a secret Randall had guarded for decades, and now it was being used to destroy his family from within. Listen to me carefully, a calm voice said on Caroline's line. Randall realized someone else had been listening to their conversation. Brooks will be released when you're ready to discuss terms. Who is this? Randall demanded. Someone who cares about children, the voice replied. Unlike you. The line went dead, leaving Randall staring at his phone in fury and growing fear. Danielle's psychological breakdown accelerated when she arrived home to find a social worker waiting in her driveway. Mrs. Ware? I'm Terry Roach from Child Protective Services. We've received some concerning reports about your household's safety standards. That's impossible, Danielle said, her voice rising. There are no children here anymore. Terry's expression grew cold. No children? According to our records, you have an 8-year-old daughter named Emma. We have reports that she hasn't been seen for several days, and her school is asking questions. Danielle's mind raced. In her eagerness to erase Emma from her life, she'd forgotten that the outside world still expected a living child to exist. Teachers, neighbors, family friends, they would all eventually ask questions about Emma's absence. She's with relatives, Danielle stammered. Which relatives? We'll need to verify her safety immediately. As Terry pulled out an official form, Danielle realized she was trapped. She couldn't produce a living child who was supposedly dead, but she couldn't explain Emma's absence without admitting to murder. I need to make some phone calls, she said weakly. Of course. We'll wait. But there was nowhere to call, no one who could help her explain away a murdered child. For the first time since this nightmare began, Danielle understood that she might have made a mistake she couldn't escape. That evening, the three conspirators met in Randall's office, their earlier confidence replaced by growing desperation. This is Terrence, Zachary said, his hands shaking as he poured himself a drink. Somehow, he survived, and now he's coming for us. Terrence is dead, Randall insisted. We saw him go into the water. Then explain this, Danielle snapped, throwing down photos that had been left on her doorstep. The images showed all three of them on the yacht, captured from angles that revealed their conspiracy in perfect detail. Explain how a dead man took these pictures. Randall studied the photos, his face growing pale. These weren't taken from a yacht. Someone was watching us from another vessel. Or from the water, Zachary said quietly. What if Terrence didn't go in to save Emma? What if he knew what we were planning and was already prepared? The possibility hung in the air like a death sentence. If Terrence had anticipated their betrayal, if he'd been planning his own countermove while they thought they were in control, then they weren't dealing with a grieving father seeking justice. They were dealing with a predator who had been hunting them from the beginning. What do we do? Danielle asked, and for the first time since the yacht, her voice carried genuine fear. Before anyone could answer, all of their phones chimed simultaneously with incoming messages. Each message contained the same image, Emma's drawing of her and her father on the beach, with new text added in red ink. She's alive. You failed. Now you pay. Chapter 7. The Devil's Due. The revelation that Emma was alive sent shockwaves through the conspiracy that shattered their remaining composure. What had been a carefully planned murder was now exposed as an attempted child killing, and the legal ramifications alone could destroy them. But Terrence wasn't interested in legal justice anymore. Zachary cracked first. The pressure of knowing his mother could be destroyed by the Nevada evidence, combined with the growing certainty that Terrence was orchestrating an elaborate revenge scheme, drove him to desperation. He made the fatal mistake of trying to run. Marcel's team intercepted him at San Francisco International Airport, where Zachary had purchased a one-way ticket to a non-extradition country using a fake passport. The confrontation was swift and professional. "Zachary Winters," Marcel said, approaching him at the gate with the casual confidence of a predator cornering wounded prey. "Mr. Ware would like a word." "I don't know any Mr. Ware," Zachary replied, but his voice cracked with terror. "Funny thing about that," Marcel continued, producing a tablet that showed surveillance footage of Zachary throwing Emma overboard. "The Coast Guard has been very interested in this video. Amazing what technology can capture these days." Zachary's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a chair. What does he want? Truth, justice, and payment for what you did to his daughter. When Zachary was brought to Terrence's secure facility, he found himself face-to-face with a man he barely recognized. The Terrence he'd known had been civilized, controlled, almost diplomatic in his business dealings. This Terrence was something else entirely, a creature carved from ice and fury, with eyes that held no warmth, no mercy, no humanity. "You threw my 8-year-old daughter into the ocean," Terrence said without preamble. "You helped plan our murders. You conspired to steal everything I'd built. But worst of all, you made Emma afraid." "I'm sorry," Zachary babbled. "It was Randall's idea. Danielle was the one who—" "I don't want apologies," Terrence interrupted. "I want you to understand what comes next." He gestured to a wall of monitors showing surveillance feeds from various locations. Zachary recognized his mother's house, Randall's office, Danielle's home, and dozens of other places connected to their conspiracy. "Your mother's case is already being reopened. The evidence of her hit and run will be released to the media tomorrow morning. Her nursing license will be revoked, her assets frozen, and she'll spend the rest of her life in prison." "Please," Zachary begged. "She's an old woman. She's suffered enough. Did you think Emma was too young to suffer when you threw her into the Pacific?" Terrence asked, "But I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you a choice." A door opened, and Emma walked in, healthy and whole, but changed by her ordeal. She looked at Zachary with the kind of clear-eyed assessment that belonged on an adult's face, not a child's. "Hello, Mr. Winters," she said calmly. "You tried to kill me." Zachary couldn't meet her gaze. "Emma, I'm so sorry. I never wanted—" "Yes, you did," Emma interrupted. "I heard you planning it. You said I was too smart, too observant. You were right about that." Terrence placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Emma deserves to see justice for what you did to her. So here's your choice, Zachary. You can confess everything. The murder attempt, the financial fraud, Randall's human trafficking operation, and your mother will be allowed to serve her sentence in minimum security. Or you can stay silent, and she'll face maximum charges for the Nevada killings plus conspiracy to commit murder." "What about me?" Zachary asked. "You?" Terrence smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression Zachary had ever seen. "You don't get choices anymore. You lost that right when you touched my daughter." The confession session lasted 6 hours. Zachary revealed everything. The months of planning, the financial schemes, the insurance fraud, and most damaging of all, the details of Randall Golden's criminal enterprise that stretched far beyond simple shipping. By the time he was finished, Terrence had enough evidence to destroy not just the immediate conspirators, but their entire network of corruption. Meanwhile, Danielle was discovering that her world was collapsing from within. The social worker's investigation had triggered a cascade of legal problems. The life insurance companies were launching fraud investigations. Her father's associates were distancing themselves from the Golden family. And most terrifyingly, people were asking questions about Emma that she couldn't answer. When Randall finally realized the scope of what they were facing, he made his own desperate play. He contacted his most dangerous associates, men who solved problems through violence, who understood that sometimes witnesses needed to disappear permanently. But Terrence had anticipated this move. When Randall's hired killers arrived at the secure facility, they found themselves outnumbered, outgunned, and facing opponents who'd spent years fighting in places where rules didn't exist. "Send them back to Randall with a message," Terrence told Marcel as they zip-tied the surviving attackers. "Tell him that he's escalated this to a level he can't handle. Tell him that if he wants a war, he'll get one. But it won't be the kind of war he's prepared for." As night fell over San Francisco, Terrence looked out at the city lights and felt the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together. His enemies had revealed themselves completely, committed crimes they couldn't take back, and shown their true nature to the world. Now came the final phase, the phase where they would learn that some sins couldn't be forgiven, some debts couldn't be paid, and some enemies couldn't be escaped. Emma appeared beside him, looking older than her 8 years. "Daddy, are you going to kill them?" Terrence considered the question seriously. "What do you think should happen to people who try to hurt children?" "I think," Emma said carefully, "that they should never be able to hurt anyone ever again." "Then that's what we'll make sure happens," Terrence replied. "One way or another." Chapter 8, Blood and Ashes. The final confrontation began at dawn when federal agents, armed with evidence provided by Terrence's confession sessions, simultaneously raided Golden shipping headquarters, Randall's mansion, and Danielle's home. But by then, the legal system was just catching up to justice that had already been served. Randall Golden was found in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of his empire. Every shipping contract had been canceled, every bank account frozen, every illegal operation exposed. His criminal associates had either fled the country or been arrested in coordinated raids. His own security team had abandoned him, leaving him alone in a building that would soon be seized by federal marshals. But Terrence wasn't interested in letting the law have the final word. "Hello, Randall," Terrence said, walking into the office with Emma at his side. "I thought you might want to see what survival looks like." Randall's face went through a range of emotions: shock, disbelief, rage, and finally fear as he understood that his carefully planned murder had failed completely. "This is impossible," he whispered. "You went into the water. We saw you both go under. You saw what you expected to see," Terrence replied. "A desperate father trying to save his daughter. You never considered that I might have been expecting your betrayal, that I might have been prepared for your attack." Emma stepped forward, her young face carrying an expression of mature judgment that would have been heartbreaking under different circumstances. "Grandpa, why did you throw me in the ocean?" Randall couldn't meet her eyes. "Emma, sweetheart, you don't understand. Business requires difficult decisions sometimes. I understand that you tried to kill me because I looked too much like Daddy," Emma replied. "I understand that you thought I was worthless. I understand that you never loved me at all." The simple truth from a child's lips hit Randall harder than any accusation. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes that might have been regret. But it was too late for regret. "The FBI will be here soon," Terrence said. "They'll arrest you for human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and about 50 other charges. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison, assuming you survive that long. Human traffickers don't fare well in federal facilities." "What do you want from me?" Randall asked. "I want you to know that this is Emma's justice," Terrence replied. "Every charge, every consequence, every moment of suffering you'll experience, it's because you tried to murder a child, your own granddaughter. And I want you to live with that knowledge for however long you have left." Meanwhile, Danielle's confrontation with reality was reaching its climax. Unable to produce a living daughter for the social workers, faced with insurance investigators who discovered the conspiracy, and abandoned by her criminal associates, she'd been reduced to a trembling wreck of her former self. When Terrence and Emma arrived at what had once been their family home, they found Danielle sitting in Emma's room, staring at the pictures and toys of the daughter she'd helped try to murder. "She was beautiful," Danielle said without turning around. "I used to look at her sometimes and wonder how I could feel so empty when I looked at my own child." "Because you're broken inside," Emma said simply. "Good mothers don't help people hurt their children." Danielle finally turned, and the sight of Emma, alive, healthy, and clearly loved, broke something fundamental in her already fragmented psyche. "This isn't real," she whispered. "You're dead. We watched you die. You watched me almost die," Emma corrected. "But Daddy saved me, because that's what real fathers do." Terrence watched his wife and daughter face each other across an unbridgeable chasm of betrayal and blood. There would be no reconciliation, no forgiveness, no healing. Some wounds were too deep, some betrayals too complete. "The FBI is outside," Terrence said. "They have enough evidence to convict you of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and child endangerment. You'll never see the outside of a prison cell. But first, I want you to understand something, he continued. Every choice you made, every lie you told, every plan you hatched, every moment you spent plotting Emma's death led you to this moment. You destroyed your own life because you couldn't love your own child. I did love her, Danielle protested weakly. No, Emma said with the clarity that only children possess. You love the idea of having a family, but you never loved me, and now you never will. As federal agents entered the house to arrest Danielle, Terrence felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. His enemies hadn't just been defeated. They'd been exposed for what they truly were, and their punishment would match their crimes. But the most important victory was standing beside him, holding his hand with a trust that had never wavered even in the darkest moments. Are we going home now, Daddy? Emma asked. We are home, Terrence replied. Wherever we are together, that's home. As they walked away from the house where their old life had died, neither of them looked back. Some chapters had to end completely before new ones could begin. Chapter 9, New Foundations. 6 months later, Terrence and Emma stood on the deck of their new home, a security-enhanced compound overlooking the Pacific, where the same waters that had nearly claimed their lives now served as a reminder of their survival. The legal proceedings had concluded with the ruthless efficiency of absolute evidence. Randall Golden received a life sentence for human trafficking and attempted murder, dying of a heart attack in his cell 3 months into his sentence. Zachary Winters received 25 years for conspiracy and attempted murder, while his mother was given a lighter sentence in exchange for testimony about the Nevada cover-up. Danielle received life without parole and would spend her remaining years in solitary confinement for her own protection. Child killers weren't popular in women's prison. But the legal victories were just the beginning of Terrence's reconstruction project. Golden Shipping had been dissolved, its legitimate assets distributed to the families of human trafficking victims, its criminal networks dismantled by international law enforcement. Terrence's security firm had expanded into a global operation focused on protecting vulnerable children and hunting predators who thought wealth and influence made them untouchable. Emma, now 9 years old, was thriving in ways that amazed her trauma counselors. The experience that would have destroyed many children had instead forged her into something unique. A child who understood darkness but chose light, who knew evil but embraced good, who had seen the worst of humanity but still believed in justice. Daddy, Marcel's here, Emma announced, pointing to the approaching helicopter. Their weekly security briefing had become a tradition, a way of staying connected to the larger mission that had grown from their personal tragedy. Marcel landed and approached with his usual grin, but Terrence could see the satisfaction in his eyes. Boss, we've got updates on the Jakarta operation. The Jakarta operation was one of dozens running globally. Terrence's organization now worked with international law enforcement to dismantle human trafficking networks, protect endangered children, and ensure that predators face consequences regardless of their wealth or connections. The rescue was successful, Marcel continued. 43 children recovered, network completely dismantled. The local authorities said it was the most professional operation they'd ever seen. Any connections to the old Golden Network? Terrence asked. Several. Turns out Randall's business partners thought they could continue operations after his death. They were wrong. Emma, who had been listening with the serious attention she brought to all matters of justice, nodded approvingly. Good. Children should be safe. It was a simple statement that carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. Emma had become something unprecedented, a child advocate who understood predators from personal experience, who could spot danger that adults missed, who had survived the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged stronger rather than broken. There's something else, Marcel said, his tone shifting. We've been approached by a consortium of tech companies. They want to fund a new initiative, a global monitoring system for child protection. They're calling it the Emma Protocol. Terrence looked at his daughter, who was studying the proposal with the analytical mind she'd inherited from him. What do you think? I think, Emma said carefully, that if we can stop other families from going through what we went through, then what happened to us meant something. It was a profound statement from someone who would start 5th grade in the fall. But Emma had never been an ordinary child, and her experiences had only sharpened the intelligence that had originally made her a target. That evening, as father and daughter stood on their deck watching the sunset paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson, Terence reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He'd lost his faith in mercy, in second chances, in the redemptive power of forgiveness. But he'd gained something more valuable: absolute clarity about justice, unwavering protection for those who couldn't protect themselves, and a daughter who understood that strength came not from avoiding darkness, but from refusing to let it define you. "Daddy," Emma said, "do you ever miss the way things were before?" Terence considered the question seriously. Before the yacht, he'd been a successful businessman with a seemingly happy family, living a life built on illusions of safety and trust. Now he was something else entirely: a guardian standing between predators and their prey, a father who would never again mistake civility for virtue or forgiveness for wisdom. "I miss believing that people were basically good," he admitted, "but I don't miss being naive about evil." "I'm glad we survived," Emma said simply. "I'm glad we're still together." "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." As night fell over their new life, Terence made the same promise he'd made every evening since their resurrection from the dark waters. He would protect the innocent, pursue the guilty, and ensure that predators who thought wealth and privilege made them untouchable learned otherwise. Some wounds never healed. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven. Some enemies couldn't be redeemed. But some survivors became stronger than their tormentors ever imagined possible. And some fathers would burn the world down before they let anyone hurt their children again. The story of Terence and Emma was far from over. It was just beginning. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.